Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of the series on improving the railways of Norway. In this part, we're going to be talking about the other rail operators in the country, which are SJ Nord, SJ, Go Ahead Norway, and the Flytoget to Oslo Airport. More specifically, we'll discuss their current networks, as well as my ideas for improving services. However, just like part 1, we won't get into service changes that require improvements or new lines that aren't already being planned. But before we get started, I'd just like to mention real quick that I do not have nearly as much footage of these rail operators as I do of V. So I'm going to try my best to include all of the footage I have of these operators, but once that runs out, you're going to have to be okay with seeing some V trains in the back while I'm talking about operators that aren't V. So I'm sorry about that. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into the video. Go Ahead Norge was the second private rail operator in the country after Flytoget, and their network is focused heavily on the south of Norway, and with only 3 lines, they are the smallest rail operator in the country, aside from Flytoget. Well, technically, but that's only technically because SJ only runs 2 lines, but SJ also runs all the rail lines in Sweden, so... Anyway, I go more in depth about the different classifications of lines in part 1, so if you want to learn more about why their 3 lines are numbered the way they are, you should go watch that video. Anyway, the 3 lines they operate are the L5 from Stavanger to Egersund, which is branded as Jærtoget, the R50 from Norway to Arendal, yes, that Arendal, branded as Sørtoget Lokal, and the F5 from Oslo via Kristiansand to Stavanger, branded as Sørtoget Region. Now, despite the network size, Go Ahead has some pretty expansive plans for the future. These include a new line connecting Skien to Vegårshei on the existing line, which would in turn reroute all existing intercity trains between Oslo and Stavanger to run via the Vestfold line instead of via Kongsberg. Now, the issue with this, though, is that a lot of stations on the existing line are going to be bypassed by this connection and just might have to end up being abandoned, and like I said in the previous video, I don't really like closing down stations permanently. Now, granted, an old abandoned rail line to Kragerø is planning to be reactivated, which would keep service at some of those stations, but it wouldn't quite bridge the gap. So, how do we fix it? Well, it's a pretty simple answer. More trains. First, let's add the things that are already being planned, like the rerouting of the F4 via Skien, and the new regional line to Kragerø, which would probably be designated the R51. Then comes my awkward, albeit necessary solution to the issue involving the gap, which would be to add a new regional service that is not currently being planned. I would call the R52, that would run on existing tracks between Kongsberg and Kristiansand, and with the addition of this new line, that could also mean that some of the stations between Norway and Kristiansand could be transferred over from the F5 to the R52. That way the intercity line can run express where it needs to. And then I would also transfer the Bratsbergbanen over to Go Ahead operation from V, because now it would connect with 2 Go Ahead lines instead of 1 Go Ahead and 1 V as it currently does. And finally, there's the L5, which is currently planned to be fully double-tracked. I wouldn't really do anything with this line because there's not much that can be done outside of current plans that don't involve new tracking or new segments. So for now, we'll keep it as it is. In later parts, that'll probably change, though, just like the F4. But yeah, that's going to be it for Go Ahead. On to the next operator. Okay, so I literally can't say anything about this one because Flytoget has no current plans for expansion. So if I were to talk about what I wanted to do to Flytoget, that would go beyond what I have planned for this video because it would involve plans that aren't currently in progress. So, oh well, on to the next one. Another smaller network, albeit smaller in Norway, is SJ, the Swedish National Railway, which only runs 2 lines in Norway, both long distance, the F1 from Oslo to Stockholm, and the F8 from Narvik to Luleå and Stockholm. The only plans I could really find for SJ are a double tracking of the entire Ufot line, which is the line from Narvik all the way to the Swedish border, and a planned high-speed line from Lillestrøm to Arvika. Overall, these new projects are pretty good, and there isn't really anything I'd change about them that I can for this video. So, on to the next and final operator. This video's been pretty quick, so hopefully this is another small one. Oh. Right. So, SJ Nord, the second largest rail operator in Norway, and a subsidiary of SJ. There's a lot to break down here, so let's get to it. First, the intercity lines. SJ Nord operates two of them. The F6 from Oslo to Trondheim along the Dovre line, which was until recently the only electrified line SJ Nord operated, and the F7 from Trondheim to Bodø, which is not only the longest intercity train in the country, but also the only unelectrified intercity line. Then there's the regional trains. These are an absolute mess, with almost every single one having multiple operating patterns, which kind of defeats the purpose of numbering routes in the first place, but whatever. In numerical order, there's the R60 from Hamar to Støren via Røros, with limited trains extending south to Oslo and north to Trondheim, and even more limited service further north to Ranheim. The R65 from Dombås to Åndalsnes, which is in the top 5 most scenic rail lines in the world. Then there's the R70, the most complex line. It runs from Steinkjer to Marienborg, where a select few services split off on a branch to Lerkendal, while the main line continues south to Støren, and one train a day starts further south in Oppdal. And then there's the R71, which runs along the Meråker line from Trondheim to Storlien across the Swedish border. And finally, the R75, also known as the Saltpendleren, from Fauske to Bodø. Alright, did you get all that? Cool, me neither. So, as for planned expansions, the F6, or the Dovre line, is being partially upgraded to high-speed standards, section by section, with double tracking sections and passing loops being installed. The Meråker line, or the R71, is currently being electrified for the whole route's length from Storlien to Trondheim, and the Trønder line, or the R70, will be electrified as far north as Stjørdal. An existing connection between Lerkendal and Langen, which is currently only used for non-revenue service and freight service, will also become electrified. In my opinion, these major upgrades offer the perfect opportunity to reorganize the absolute mess these services are, as well as separating branches into new lines to help distinguish them from the rest of the services. First, I'd extend the R71 from Trondheim south to Lerkendal. Lerkendal station is currently single-tracked, so you could probably only send every other train down there, but that would be miles better than the current 2 round trips the station sees a day. And considering the fact that the Type 76 trains are bi-mode, and the Lerkendal branch is being electrified, this wouldn't even need any new infrastructure or rolling stock to do. Next, to take full advantage of the electrification being planned, I would create a new local line running between Støren and Stjørdal, although given the fact that a lot of the lines south of Marienborg is mostly, if not entirely, single-tracked, most trains would probably short-turn at Marienborg, but this is probably for the better, as a lot of other high-frequency services will be running along that section, which will be pretty much at capacity in this plan. Next, we'll clean up the R70 and the R60, as both of these lines have some pretty confusing service patterns, and just to simplify it, we'll make all R70 trains run between Steinkjer and Støren, and all R60 trains will run between Hamar and Støren, with every other train continuing further north to Trondheim. As for the F7 and the R75, they will be a topic for part 3 because the amount of changes necessary for these lines goes far beyond what is currently being planned. And finally, there's the R65. This line is kind of like the second Flom line. I would propose to run a few through services to Trondheim, but that would involve reversing the trains at Dombås, and the corridor between Støren and Trondheim is already full enough as is, as I already talked about. So we're not going to do anything to the R65 just yet. Oh, and I almost forgot to say what I would change for the F6. The only change that I'd propose is something that I already discussed in the previous part, and that is to absorb those RE10 services from V that run to Dombås. I just feel like they would be better suited as intercity trains between Oslo and Trondheim. They could also still short turn at Dombås, but I just feel like it would make more sense for SJ Nord to be operating them. And it also kind of makes sense for them to be run by SJ Nord as intercity trains, considering the fact that the intercity trains are literally more local than these express services, which is pretty funny to me. But yeah, that's going to do it for part 2 of the series. This part is a lot shorter than the previous part, partially because I actually have a script for this one, so it was a lot less rambly to make. So, for those of you that were a bit disappointed that part 2 didn't include any of my ideas for changes, well, you're in luck, because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about in part 3. Yeah, part 3 is basically just going to be me talking about what I would do for transit expansions and railway proposals in Norway. So if that's something that you would be interested in, just make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so that way you know when that video comes out and you can watch it and tell me what you think about my ideas. So yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I'm the Autistic Transit Fan, and I'll see you in the next one.